but the priorities of parliamentary agenda sometimes take precedence over the agenda of the future. And it is in that context, I am very happy that we have had this discussion here today and have been able, in so doing, to try and deal with some of the problems of tomorrow. Let me just say a few words, because I do not intend to spend too much time and allow much of the time for your own discourse. As I listened to Mr. Kitui, Dr. Kitui from UNCTAD, not only did he give us a total picture of the new developmental state, but he raised an important issue of new vulnerabilities. And I remember a discussion I had with him in Geneva, in which we discussed this issue of new vulnerabilities in the context of trade and investment agreements. And it was pointed out to me that as countries sign new trade and investment agreements, these are being questioned by lawyers, and a new industry is emerging, which is the arbitration industry. And that, he identified in the discussion, was a new vulnerability for small states. I raise that if only to say that the structural vulnerabilities of which we have been engaged in the past are only part of the larger issue of new vulnerabilities and who is profiting from the new vulnerabilities of today. I listened very carefully to Professor Amitav Acharya, and I know we will have a full session tomorrow on diplomacy in the Caribbean. But in his analysis of multiplex diplomacy, in which he says non-alignment must now give way to multi-alignment, I look forward to what our panel tomorrow will say in elaboration on that, on many other points. But I must agree with one of his concepts, that leadership is a fluid concept and must be based on ownership by all those who are involved in the exercise. But let me take this opportunity to say a special word of thanks on behalf of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, for the presence here today of, first of all, my own colleague, Fred Mitchell from Bahamas, speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister, and indeed, the newest Prime Minister in Caribbean, Mr. Timothy Harris, for being here today. And both of them have given us a certain amount of food that we will have to incorporate. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar had urged upon us when we were organizing this conference, this forum, and when we took it to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, to let it not be what we have been accustomed to feel as a talk shop, and that as we search for the future solutions, we must also try and solve the current problems. And I believe that is what happened in the presentation by the Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, an intellectual in his own right, a strategist by instinct, and a practitioner by profession. He has been able to merge all of this in his presentation, and has always been so in the Caribbean, and come down to the view that the will of the Caribbean society reflected from the ethos of our people and the decision-makings of our architecture is where we have to search for the new times, not admitting that there were new ideas for the new times ahead of us. So I want to end these brief remarks by saying that it is indeed a great honor for us here in this forum to bring together this high-level forum, because so often we compartmentalize our conversations at the level of academics, practitioners. But by bringing the high-level forum here today, with the presenters we have had, we are bringing to integrate the political dimension that is so necessary for finding a better future. I thank all those who have participated, and I certainly want to thank you very much for staying the course and being with us here today. Thank you.
Colleagues, you have been very generous with your attention and your kind observation. The floor is now yours. You may, of course, ask questions of the panel generically, or you may focus your question to any of our distinguished colleagues. The floor is open.
The floor. Hello. Thank you. Nancy Nicholas from the Foreign Ministry of St. Lucia. Just a brief run-through of the things that was said today on the issue of reinventing the Caribbean or regionalism by the professor from the Global School of Washington International Relations. The question was posed that we live in a multiplex world and not a hegemonic world. I beg to differ. I think we are living in a world which is multiplex but not non-hegemonic. If we should go by Modelsky's version of how hegemons emerge and die, the cyclical model of hegemony, and if we should go by the pure denotive definition of hegemony as a preponderance of power to exert a certain influence to change the dynamics of international relations, we will realize that even if we are in a multiplex world, we are still in a hegemonic world, but a differently hegemonic world. A hegemonic world where, due to the fact that we no longer have single actors, but multiple actors in the international scene, we may see a hegemony emerging, which is a coalition hegemony. We now have coalition governments. So we may have a coalition hegemony of military-industrial complexes, multinational corporations, assuming the power of a once global power as a hegemony. So on that ground, I beg to differ respectfully. How do we invent a regionalism that is essentially caught between progress and standstill, having to navigate interlocking challenges? In the Caribbean, we have our own ISIS. The US worries about ISIS, but we have ours. We have poverty, we have underdevelopment, we have illiteracy, we have violence, domestic violence, crime. Before we reinvent our regionalism, how do we attempt to navigate such problems that have a devastating effect on the economies that we need in order to reinvent that regionalism? And my last question, I think it was the Honorable Timothy Harris who said that, well, speaking of the public service, where we say the public service must work. But we cannot expect a public service to work when we want it to work. Sometimes we call on the public service to work, but sometimes we have no respect for meritocracy. We favor patronage, handouts. So how do you expect a public service to work If today you expect it to execute the moral influence and tomorrow you expect it to be like a lady with a PhD, a panty hanging down, that you could drop anybody in there when you want because of political favors.
She cannot put that on you.
And just one last question.
No, thank you. I think we could probably have a response from Amitav and Minister.
I am ending now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Professor, could you respond first of all, a few minutes, and then, of course...
can I speak from here?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. You must be an academic. You must be a professor.
No, I'm not. I'm just
Diplomat.
Okay. But anyway, your question is a very good one. And the idea of hegemony can be coalitional. Now, I was talking about a very stylized version of hegemony, that the British hegemony, global hegemony, physical, then American. I don't think we will have a globally dominant superpower in the world in the way we had Britain and the United States. That's the kind of context in which I was talking about. But, you know, if you're a Gramscian, you say there is a Gramscian hegemony, there's going to be always a set of ideas and ideology always going to dominate us. But I think we are, relatively speaking, in a much more plural world. And our lives are not going to be, especially in different parts of the world. Maybe in the Caribbean, it doesn't show so much. We're so close to the United States here. But in East Asia, it does so differently. That the old hegemonies are changing and giving way to something else. And one very quick other point, and this is to Sir Rolf. I was asked to talk about disruptive ideas, not new ideas. Some old ideas are very disruptive.
Absolutely.
So the idea of liberty is very old and very disruptive.
Yes.
And we have to bring back some of the old ideas because of the changing times. The context is so different that some of the old ideas are very disruptive. And Marxism could be a very disruptive idea. I mean, I agree with you that this, as an academic, or at least an idea, it hasn't disappeared. As a policy, maybe. So thank you. That was my clarification.
Prime Minister Harris?
I just want to say something about the public service. My dear comrade sister raised it. Often we have this discourse that when somebody, a politician in particular, would raise a question about people in the public service not working, we get the response that you can't ask them when to work, when you want them to work, because of patronage in some respects. I find the answer to be polemical and stylizes the facts. What is the true situation? We have a combined and uneven development in the public service. We have to acknowledge, truthfully, that there are some exceptionally gifted public servants who do very well. We have a number of public servants who are not quite exceptional, but who make important contributions. And we have a lot of public servants who are simply lazy. If we do not wish to accept that, we are putting our head in the sand. It is true that there are some public servants who support the ruling regime, would use the support for the ruling regime as a proxy for doing real work. Those are terrible public servants.